I woke up to the sound of my neighbor pounding on my front door at 2 in the morning, and that's when I knew the power outage was about to become the least of my problems. The February ice storm had knocked out electricity across half of Austin, Texas, and I'd just managed to fall asleep after setting up my generator to keep my refrigerator and a few essential items running. My name is Cameron Bradley, and I'd lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for about 3 years. It was one of those newer developments where every house looked almost identical, and the homeowners association ruled with an iron fist. I stumbled to the door in my sweatpants and opened it to find my neighbor, Greg Martinez, looking panicked in the beam of his flashlight. "Cameron, man, I'm so sorry to wake you up, but it's an emergency. My wife's oxygen concentrator just died and our power's completely out. I saw your lights on. Do you have any extension cords I could borrow? Just until morning when the medical supply place opens." I didn't even hesitate. "Of course, come on in. I've got several in the garage." I led Greg through my house and into the garage where I kept a well-stocked collection of tools and supplies. I handed him 3 heavy-duty extension cords, the expensive kind that could handle serious wattage. They'd cost me about $60 each, but this was literally a life-or-death situation. "Thank you so much," Greg said, his voice shaking with relief. Maria's oxygen levels were dropping. "I'll get these back to you first thing in the morning, I promise. Don't worry about it. Just take care of Maria. If you need anything else, just knock." After Greg left, I managed to fall back asleep despite the cold and the constant hum of my generator outside. The storm had been predicted to last through the night and into the next day, and the power company was estimating at least 48 hours before service would be restored to our area. When I woke up the next morning around 8, the world outside was coated in a thick layer of ice. Trees bent under the weight, and the streets looked like skating rinks. I made coffee on my camping stove and checked on my generator, which was still running smoothly in the backyard. I'd filled it with enough fuel to last another 12 hours. Around 9 o'clock, there was another knock at my door. This time it was Brenda Patterson, the HOA president and the neighborhood's resident busybody. Brenda was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for women who enjoy making other people's lives difficult. "You know the one." "Good morning, Cameron," she said in that syrupy sweet voice that always preceded something unpleasant. "I couldn't help but notice you're running a generator." "Morning, Brenda. Yeah, just trying to keep my food from spoiling." "I see. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but according to HOA Bylaws Section 7.3, generators are not permitted to run between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. due to noise ordinances." I stared at her. "Brenda, there's a power outage. Half the neighborhood is freezing." "Rules are rules, Cameron. I'll let it slide this time since you probably weren't aware, but going forward, please adhere to the quiet hours. Also, I noticed you have extension cords running from your property to the Martinez house. That's a violation of Section 12.1, which prohibits any structures, cables, or equipment from crossing property lines without written HOA approval. Those cords are keeping Maria Martinez alive. She needs her oxygen machine." Brenda's expression didn't change. "I understand that, and it's very charitable of you. However, rules exist for a reason. They need to be submitted in writing with the appropriate forms, and the board will review the request at our next monthly meeting." "The next meeting isn't for 3 weeks. That's correct. In the meantime, I'll need you to remove those extension cords by noon today. If you don't, I'll be forced to remove them myself as per my authority as HOA president during emergency situations." She smiled that tight little smile that made my blood pressure spike. Have a good day, Cameron. She walked away before I could respond, her boots crunching on the icy sidewalk. I stood there fuming for a moment before calling Greg to warn him about what Brenda had said. He was just as angry as I was, but we agreed to look for alternative solutions. He said he'd try to find a battery backup system or see if any other neighbors closer to his house could help. The morning passed slowly. The temperature outside hovered around 28 degrees, and inside my house, it was only about 55 despite my best efforts. I spent most of the time wrapped in blankets, reading a book by the window light and checking my phone for updates about the power restoration. Around 11:30, I decided to check on the extension cords, just to make sure everything was still working properly for Greg. I walked out my back door and toward the fence line that separated our properties. The extension cords were gone. I stood there, confused, looking at the outlet where they'd been plugged in. The cover was closed and there was no sign of the cords anywhere. I immediately called Greg. "Hey, did you unplug those extension cords?" I asked. "No, they're still running." "Why?" "Because they're not plugged in on my end anymore." There was a pause. "That's impossible. Maria's oxygen concentrator is still working. Hold on." I heard muffling sounds, then Greg came back on the line. "Cameron, the cords are plugged into the Hendersons' outdoor outlet. Did you move them?" The Hendersons lived on the other side of Greg's house. I definitely hadn't moved anything. "No, I didn't touch them. I'll be right over." I walked around the block to Greg's house, careful not to slip on the ice. When I got there, he was standing in his backyard looking at 3 extension cords that were definitely mine, now connected to his neighbor's outdoor outlet. "The Hendersons are in Colorado visiting their daughter," Greg said. "They won't be back for another week." "Did you move these here?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "No, I swear. I've been inside with Maria all morning. The last time I looked, they were still coming from your house." We both realized it at the same time. "Brenda. She said she'd remove them if I didn't do it by noon," I said, "but I didn't think she'd actually unplug life-supporting medical equipment." "That's insane," Greg said. "She could have killed Maria. What if I hadn't noticed? What if the cords hadn't reached from the Hendersons' house?" I was furious, but I tried to stay calm. "Look, keep them plugged in there for now. I'm going to go talk to Brenda." I marched down the street to Brenda's house, which was one of the larger models in the neighborhood. It had a perfectly manicured lawn, even in winter, and decorative shutters that probably cost more than my car. I rang the doorbell and waited, my anger building with each second. Brenda answered with that same fake smile. "Cameron, what can I do for you? You unplugged my extension cords." "I removed the HOA violation, yes. I warned you this morning that they needed to be gone by noon. You could have killed someone. Those cords were powering medical equipment." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. I simply relocated them to another power source. The woman is fine, isn't she? That's not the point. You had no right to touch my property." "Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, during a declared neighborhood emergency, which this certainly qualifies as, I have the authority to remove any violations that pose safety or aesthetic concerns." Those cords were both. They were creating a tripping hazard across property lines. "There's ice everywhere. Nobody's walking through our backyards. And you didn't just remove them, you took them and plugged them into someone else's house without their permission." I made a judgment call to ensure the woman's medical needs were met while also maintaining HOA standards. "You should be thanking me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Brenda, I want my extension cords back, right now." "No, excuse me." I said no. "Those cords are currently in use for a legitimate purpose. Once the power is restored and they're no longer needed, I'll make sure they're returned to you. They're my property." You can't just take them. I didn't take them. I relocated them as part of my HOA duties. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have several other violations to address today. This power outage has people thinking they can just do whatever they want. She started to close the door. I put my hand on the door frame. Brenda, I'm serious. Those cords cost me almost $200. I want them back today. Her expression hardened. Remove your hand from my door, or I'll call the police and tell them you're harassing me. I stepped back, not wanting to give her any ammunition. Fine, but this isn't over. Have a nice day, Cameron. The door closed in my face. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then I pulled out my phone and did what I should have done in the first place. I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher was professional but clearly overwhelmed. Sir, I understand your frustration, but with the current emergency situation, we're prioritizing life-threatening calls. This sounds like a civil matter. She took my property without permission. Isn't that theft? It could be, but if she's claiming she did it in her capacity as HOA president, you'd probably need to pursue it through civil court or small claims. I can have an officer come out when things calm down, but it might be several days. I thanked her and hung up, feeling defeated. Then I had another idea. I called my insurance agent. Cameron, hey, Tom answered. You doing okay in this storm? I've been better. Listen, I have a weird question. If someone takes my property and refuses to give it back, does my homeowner's insurance cover that? Depends. What are we talking about? I explained the situation. Tom listened and then sighed. Unfortunately, no. Your homeowner's policy covers theft by unknown parties, not civil disputes with neighbors. But here's what I can tell you. If your HOA president took your property without your consent, that's conversion at minimum, possibly theft. The fact that she's claiming HOA authority doesn't matter. HOA bylaws don't supersede property rights and criminal law. So what do I do? Document everything. Take photos, get written statements from witnesses if you can, save any emails or texts. Then file a police report, even if they won't come out right away. You need that paper trail. After that, send her a certified letter demanding return of your property within a specific time frame. If she doesn't comply, file in small claims court. That's going to take weeks. I know, man. I'm sorry. Welcome to dealing with HOAs. I've seen these disputes get really ugly. Some of these board members think they're running their own little kingdoms. After I got off the phone with Tom, I went back home and did exactly what he suggested. I took photos of where my extension cords had been plugged in, showing they were now gone. I wrote down everything that had happened, including exact quotes as best as I could remember them. I took photos of the cords now plugged into the Hendersons' outlet. I even knocked on a few neighbors' doors to see if anyone had witnessed Brenda taking the cords. My neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, had indeed seen something. Oh yes, I saw Brenda over there around 11, she said, standing in her doorway wrapped in a thick robe. She was unplugging something from your house. I thought maybe you'd asked her to help with something. Would you be willing to write that down and sign it? Dorothy looked uncomfortable. Cameron, I don't want to get involved in HOA drama. Brenda already fined me twice last year for my mailbox not being the right shade of black. I understand, but what she did was steal my property. I just need the truth documented. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, give me a piece of paper. I got her statement and thanked her profusely. Then I went home and filed a police report online through the Austin Police Department's website. Even if they couldn't come out immediately, at least it would be on record. The rest of the day was tense. The power stayed out, the temperature kept dropping, and I kept thinking about my expensive extension cords in someone else's yard. Greg called me in the afternoon to apologize again. I feel terrible about this. If I'd known she was going to steal your stuff, I would have found another solution. It's not your fault, Greg. Brenda's the one who decided to commit theft. How's Maria doing? She's okay, thank God. The oxygen concentrator is still running. The Hendersons have one of those outdoor outlets with a weather cover so it's protected. But Cameron, I'm worried. What if Brenda decides to unplug it again? I've got it documented now. She does that, and I'll make sure the police take it seriously. That would be reckless endangerment at minimum. That night, the temperature dropped into the teens. My generator kept running, but I was burning through fuel faster than I'd anticipated. The power company sent out an update saying restoration would take at least another 48 hours due to the extensive damage to the infrastructure. I tried to sleep, but couldn't stop thinking about the situation. It wasn't even really about the money anymore. It was the principle. Brenda had taken my property, endangered someone's life, and acted like she'd done me a favor. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. I looked up the other members of the HOA board and sent them all emails explaining what had happened. If Brenda was claiming she'd acted in her official capacity, then the board should know about it. I got 2 responses. The first was from Richard Palmer, the treasurer, who said he'd look into it but made it clear he didn't want to contradict Brenda. The second was from Janet Wu, the secretary, who was much more helpful. Cameron, I'm horrified by what you've described. That's not acceptable behavior, regardless of HOA bylaws. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Can you attend? I confirmed I would be there. Finally, it felt like something was moving in the right direction. The emergency board meeting was held at Brenda's house, since the community center had no power. I arrived at 10 a.m. to find Janet and Richard already there, along with 2 other board members I'd never met, Susan O'Neill and David Kim. Brenda opened the meeting with her usual officiousness. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Janet called this meeting to discuss some concerns raised by Mr. Bradley regarding my handling of an HOA violation during the power outage. Cameron, would you like to present your complaint? I laid out everything that had happened, keeping my voice calm and factual. I showed them the photos, the written statement from Dorothy, and the police report number. When I finished, there was a long silence. Janet spoke first. Brenda, is this accurate? Did you take Cameron's property and relocate it without his permission? I addressed an HOA violation, Brenda said. The extension cords were creating a hazard and violating multiple bylaws. But did you take his property without his permission? Janet pressed. I relocated it to ensure both compliance and the continuation of medical care for Mrs. Martinez. That's theft, David Kim said quietly. You can't just take someone's property, even if you're HOA president. It's not theft. It's enforcement of HOA regulations. Brenda, Richard said, looking uncomfortable. I think you may have overstepped here. The bylaws give you authority to fine residents and place liens on properties for violations. They don't give you authority to confiscate personal property. I didn't confiscate anything. The cords are still in use. They'll be returned when they're no longer needed. That's not the point, Janet said. You took something that didn't belong to you without permission. That's the definition of theft. Brenda's face was turning red. I was trying to help. That woman needed medical equipment, and Cameron's violation was endangering the aesthetic standards of the community. I found a solution that addressed both issues. By stealing my property, I said. I did not steal anything. Susan O'Neill, who'd been silent until now, cleared her throat. I think we need to table this discussion and consult with our HOA attorney. This is getting into legal territory that's beyond our expertise. Agreed, Richard said quickly, clearly wanting to avoid further conflict. No, Janet said firmly. We don't need an attorney to tell us that taking someone's property without permission is wrong. Brenda, I'm making a motion that you immediately return Cameron's extension cords to him and issue a formal apology. I second that motion, David said. Brenda looked furious. You're all overreacting. This is a minor issue being blown out of proportion. Call the vote, Janet said. Richard raised his hand reluctantly. All in favor of requiring Brenda to return the extension cords. Janet, David, and Susan raised their hands. Richard hesitated, then raised his too. Motion passes 4-1, Richard said. Brenda, please return the cords. Fine, Brenda snapped. But I'm noting in the minutes that I acted in good faith to address a legitimate HOA concern, and this board is undermining my authority as president. Note whatever you want, Janet said. Cameron, I apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened. I thought that would be the end of it. Brenda walked out of her house with obvious irritation and drove off, presumably to get my extension cords from the Hendersons' house. I waited at home, expecting her to drop them off with a grudging apology. An hour passed. Then, too, I called Janet. She hasn't brought them back yet, I told her. What, she left here 45 minutes ago. Where would she go? I don't know, but I'm getting worried. Greg still needs those cords. Janet said she'd try calling Brenda. I waited another 30 minutes, then decided to check on Greg. When I got to his house and walked around to the backyard, my stomach dropped. The extension cords were gone again. Greg came out, looking panicked. They were just unplugged 10 minutes ago. I was inside and heard Maria's oxygen machine start beeping. By the time I got outside, the cords were gone. Where's the concentrator getting power now? It's not. We switched Maria to the backup oxygen tanks, but those only last a few hours. Cameron, what's happening? I called Janet again and told her. She was as shocked as I was. This is insane. She's deliberately defying the board's directive. I'm calling her right now. I waited at Greg's house while Janet tried to reach Brenda. After a few minutes, my phone rang. She's not answering, Janet said. I drove by her house and her car's in the driveway, but she's not coming to the door. Should I call the police? I think you'd better. This has gone way beyond an HOA dispute. She's now stolen your property twice and is endangering someone's life. I called 911 this time, not the non-emergency line. I explained that my property had been stolen and that the theft was directly endangering someone who required medical equipment to breathe. The dispatcher took it more seriously this time. Officers are responding. Please stay at your current location. 2 Austin Police Department officers arrived about 20 minutes later. I walked them through everything that had happened, showed them all my documentation, and introduced them to Greg, who explained his wife's medical situation. One of the officers, a woman named Officer Patricia Reyes, frowned as she looked at her notes. So this HOA president took your extension cords this morning, was ordered by the HOA board to return them, and instead of returning them to you, she took them again from this location. That's correct. And you have proof these cords belong to you. I showed her the receipts I'd dug out of my email. I'd bought them from Home Depot 6 months ago. The officer photographed the receipts with her phone. All right, we'll go talk to her, Officer Reyes said. I followed them to Brenda's house at a distance. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see Brenda answer the door and have a conversation with the officers that lasted about 5 minutes. Then she shook her head and closed the door. The officers came back to where I was waiting. She says she doesn't have your extension cords, Officer Reyes said. She's lying. Where else would they be? She claims she returned them to the Hendersons' property and that if they're missing now, someone else must have taken them. Without proof that she currently has them in her possession, we can't force entry to search her home. But you saw they were taken from there. You have the timeline. I understand your frustration, Mr. Bradley. Here's what I can do. I'm filing a theft report with her listed as the primary suspect. The report will be forwarded to the detective division. They may want to follow up with a search warrant if they determine there's enough probable cause. How long will that take? It depends on caseload. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks. Greg's wife could die in a few weeks. Officer Reyes looked sympathetic. I understand. For the immediate medical situation, I'd recommend calling 311 and seeing if there are any emergency resources available for medical equipment during the power outage. The city set up some emergency services centers. But as for your property, this is going to be an ongoing investigation. After the officers left, I felt defeated. Greg looked even worse. Cameron, I can't thank you enough for trying, but I need to focus on Maria right now. I'm going to take her to the emergency room. They'll at least have power and oxygen there. I'm so sorry, Greg. It's not your fault. It's that crazy woman's fault. I went home and stared at my phone for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. Then I remembered something Tom, my insurance agent, had said about documenting everything. I pulled up the HOA community Facebook page and posted a detailed account of what had happened, including photos of the receipts, the police report number, and a factual timeline. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had over 50 comments from neighbors expressing shock and anger at Brenda's behavior. Several people shared their own stories of her overreach and vindictive enforcement of minor violations. One person mentioned that Brenda had threatened to fine them for having their garage door open for more than 30 minutes while they were unloading groceries. Janet Wu commented, "The board is aware of this situation and is taking it very seriously. We will be calling for a vote of no confidence in our president at the next regular meeting." But the most interesting comment came from a neighbor I'd never met named Tom Whitmore. "I have a security camera that covers the street. I think I might have footage of Brenda taking something from a yard this morning. Let me check." I messaged him immediately, and he invited me over to look at his footage. Tom lived 2 houses down from me, and his camera system was surprisingly sophisticated. "I installed it after we had some package thefts last year," he explained, pulling up the footage on his computer. "The cameras are motion activated and have pretty good resolution." He scrubbed through to that morning around 11:15. There, clear as day, was Brenda walking down the sidewalk, cutting through my yard and disappearing into my backyard. About 5 minutes later, she reappeared carrying 3 orange extension cords. "Can you see where she went with them?" I asked. Tom switched to another camera angle. "We watched Brenda walk down the street with my cords, turn the corner toward Greg's house, and disappear from view." "Let me check the afternoon," Tom said, switching to a different timestamp. Around 1:30 p.m. after the board meeting, there was Brenda's car pulling up to the Hendersons' house. She got out, walked into their backyard, and came back out a few minutes later with the extension cords. She put them in her trunk and drove away. "Can I get a copy of this footage?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Absolutely. I'll email it to you right now, and I'll testify if you need me to." What she did is theft, plain and simple. Armed with this new evidence, I called the police non-emergency line again and asked to speak with Officer Reyes. I was transferred to her voicemail and left a detailed message explaining that I had security footage showing Brenda taking my property, and that I had the name and contact information of the property owner who had the footage. Then I did something that felt a bit vindictive, but also necessary. I posted the footage on the HOA Facebook page. The reaction was explosive. By evening, over 200 people had viewed it and commented. Someone had even shared it to a local Austin community Facebook group, where it got picked up by even more people. Several neighbors were calling for Brenda's immediate removal from the board. Around 7 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Bradley, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Austin Police Department's Property Crimes Division. I received your case from Officer Reyes. I've also seen the security footage that's been circulating online. I'd like to come by tomorrow morning to get a formal statement and obtain the original footage. We'll be pursuing charges." "Thank you so much," I said, relief flooding through me. "What kind of charges?" "Based on what I've seen, we're looking at theft of property and potentially interfering with medical equipment, which could be a more serious charge given the circumstances. I'll know more after I review everything in detail." "When will you arrest her?" "That depends on a few factors. We'll need to complete the investigation, obtain a warrant, and coordinate with the DA's office. But given the video evidence and the value of the stolen property, I don't anticipate this taking too long, probably within a few days." That night, the power finally came back on. My house slowly warmed up, my refrigerator hummed back to life, and I took the first hot shower I'd had in 3 days. Greg called to tell me they'd returned from the hospital and that Maria was okay. The emergency room had given her a full oxygen tank that would last until the power was restored, which it now was. "Cameron, I saw the video. I can't believe you got that on camera." Tom Whitmore deserves the credit, but yeah, it's pretty damning. "Do you think she'll actually get arrested?" "The detective seems to think so. We'll see." The next morning, Detective Martinez came by as promised. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who gave me confidence that she knew what she was doing. I gave her a detailed written statement, and then we walked over to Tom's house so he could provide the original footage and his own statement. "This is excellent evidence," Detective Martinez said as she reviewed the footage again on Tom's computer. "You can clearly see her taking the property and putting it in her vehicle. Combined with the witness statements and the timeline, this is a solid case." "So what happens next?" I asked. "I'll prepare a warrant application for theft of property." "Given the value, about $200 you said, this would be a Class B misdemeanor in Texas, punishable by up to 180 days in jail and a fine. However, there's also the element of her interfering with medical equipment. I'm going to consult with the DA's office about potentially adding an endangerment charge." "How long before the warrant is issued?" "If everything goes smoothly, probably 2 to 3 days. A judge needs to review and sign it. Once that happens, we'll execute the warrant." Over the next 2 days, the situation in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. The video had been shared thousands of times across various social media platforms. Local news stations had picked up the story, and a reporter from KView even came by to interview me. Homeowners associations have faced criticism for years over aggressive enforcement tactics, the reporter said during the interview. But this case appears to go beyond overzealous rule enforcement into criminal behavior. What would you say to HOA board members watching this? "I'd say that being on an HOA board doesn't put you above the law," I replied. "You can't just take people's property because you think a rule is being violated. There are proper procedures, and those procedures don't include theft." The interview aired that evening. By nighttime, it had been viewed over 50,000 times on YouTube. Janet Wu called me. "Cameron, I wanted to give you an update. The board held an emergency meeting tonight, and we voted unanimously to remove Brenda as president effective immediately. We also voted to ban her from holding any board position for the next 5 years. That's a start, I said, but I still don't have my extension cords back. I know. We sent her a certified letter demanding their return and informing her of the board's decision. She has 48 hours to comply or we'll pursue our own legal action against her. The police are already pursuing criminal charges. Good. She deserves it. What she did was unconscionable. On the third day after I'd met with Detective Martinez, I woke up early and went for a run. The ice had mostly melted, and the neighborhood was returning to normal. When I got back home and was stretching in my driveway, I saw something that made me stop. 3 police cars were parked in front of Brenda's house. I watched from a distance as Detective Martinez and 2 uniformed officers approached Brenda's front door. She answered, and even from where I stood, I could see the shock on her face. Detective Martinez held up what looked like a document and said something I couldn't hear. Brenda's face went pale. They led her out of the house in handcuffs. A few minutes later, I felt a complex mix of emotions watching it happen. Part of me felt vindicated, part of me felt bad for her despite what she'd done, and part of me just felt tired of the whole situation. Detective Martinez saw me standing there and walked over after Brenda had been placed in one of the patrol cars. "We executed the warrant this morning," she said. "We found your extension cords in her garage. They'll be held as evidence for now, but you'll get them back eventually." What's she being charged with? Class B misdemeanor theft and reckless endangerment. The DA felt there was enough evidence for both charges given that she knew the extension cords were being used for medical equipment and took them anyway, twice. What happens now? She'll be arraigned, probably later today or tomorrow. She'll either post bail or be released on her own recognizance. Then there'll be a trial date set. These cases usually take a few months to work through the system. Thank you for taking this seriously. Thank you for documenting everything so thoroughly. It made my job a lot easier. The news of Brenda's arrest spread through the neighborhood faster than the earlier video had. By afternoon, it was all over social media and local news. I got at least 20 phone calls and text messages from neighbors expressing support and, in some cases, gratitude. One message in particular stood out. It was from a neighbor named Patricia Ellis, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood. "Cameron, I just wanted to thank you for standing up to Brenda. 3 years ago, she forced me to cut down a 60-year-old oak tree in my front yard because she said it violated some aesthetic guideline. I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight it, so I just complied. It broke my heart. I'm glad someone finally held her accountable. Over the next few weeks, the case moved forward. Brenda pleaded not guilty at her arraignment and was released on a $2,000 bond. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd acted in good faith as HOA president and that it was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. The judge wasn't buying it. "Miss Patterson, you took property that didn't belong to you without permission, not once but twice. The fact that you held a position in a homeowners association doesn't give you the right to confiscate residents' property. The video evidence is clear. The witnesses are credible, and the timeline is documented. This case will proceed to trial." The HOA board, under Janet Wu's leadership as the new president, was much more reasonable. They formally apologized to both Greg and me at a neighborhood meeting. They also announced they were conducting a full review of the HOA bylaws to ensure they were reasonable and legally sound. "We want this to be a community where people enjoy living, not a dictatorship where residents live in fear of petty fines and vindictive enforcement," Janet said to applause from the packed community center. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, I got my extension cords back from evidence. They were a little worse for wear, but they still worked. I gave them to Greg as a gift. "I can't accept these," he protested. "After everything you went through." "Please," I said, "keep them. Consider it payment for letting me use your story to nail Brenda. Besides, Maria might need them again someday." When the trial date arrived, I took the day off work to attend. The courthouse in downtown Austin was busy, and I had to wait in line to go through security. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected, with about 30 seats for spectators. About half of them were filled with people I recognized from the neighborhood. Brenda sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Michael Chen, presented the case methodically. He showed the security footage, which was even more damning on the big courtroom screen. He called Tom Whitmore to testify about his camera system and what the footage showed. He called me to testify about what had happened and to verify that the extension cords were mine. He called Officer Reyes to testify about responding to the scene and about Brenda's statements. He called Greg to testify about his wife's medical needs and how Brenda's actions had endangered her. Then he called Dorothy Chen, my elderly neighbor, who testified that she'd seen Brenda taking something from my property. The defense attorney tried to poke holes in the testimony, suggesting that maybe Brenda had intended to return the cords, that maybe she'd acted out of concern for neighborhood safety, that maybe the video didn't clearly show theft because she'd claimed to be acting in her official HOA capacity. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on both charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, I attended again. So did Greg and Maria Martinez, who wanted to give a victim impact statement. "Your Honor," Maria said, her voice shaky but determined, "I have a lung condition that requires oxygen therapy 24 hours a day. When Miss Patterson took those extension cords that were powering my concentrator, she put my life at risk. My husband found a temporary solution, but if he hadn't, I could have died. The power outage was already a scary time. To have someone deliberately cut off my oxygen because of a HOA rule is something I'll never forget. I still have anxiety when I think about it." The judge listened carefully and took notes. Then it was time for sentencing. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, "you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to help maintain the neighborhood, not to rule over them like a tyrant. You took someone's property not once but twice, and in doing so, you endangered someone's life. That shows a level of recklessness and disregard for others that I find deeply troubling." The judge sentenced Brenda to 90 days in jail, with 60 days suspended, meaning she'd serve 30 days. She also received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for the cost of the extension cords plus court costs. She was also permanently banned from serving on the HOA board. Brenda started crying as the sentence was read. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she just shook her head and kept crying. As people filed out of the courtroom, several neighbors came up to thank me for pursuing the case. "You did something a lot of us have wanted to do for years," one man said. "She made our lives miserable over the tiniest things. I'm glad she finally faced consequences." Janet Wu was there too. "Cameron, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for your patience through all of this. I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," I agreed, "but it was worth it." A few weeks later, the HOA held a neighborhood barbecue, the first social event we'd had in over a year. The weather was beautiful. Kids were playing in the park, and people were actually talking to each other instead of just hurrying into their houses. Greg and Maria were there, and Maria was doing much better. She had a portable oxygen tank with her but was in good spirits. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Much better, thank you. And thank you again for everything you did. I know you didn't have to go through all that trouble." "Yes, I did," I said. "What Brenda did was wrong. Someone had to stand up to her." Tom Whitmore came over with his wife. "Cameron, I've been meaning to tell you, 3 other neighbors have asked me to help them install security cameras after everything that happened. I think people are realizing it pays to have evidence." "That's probably a good idea for everyone," I said. As the sun set and people started heading home, I stood there for a moment looking around at the neighborhood. It felt different now, lighter somehow. The reign of terror was over. Janet Wu came over as I was packing up my chair. "I wanted to let you know, the board finalized the new bylaws. We cut about 40% of the old rules and made the rest much more reasonable. No more fines for grass being half an inch too long. No more restrictions on what color you can paint your front door. No more nonsense." "That's great to hear." "We also added a clause that specifically prohibits board members from confiscating or relocating residents' property under any circumstances. It's unofficially called the Brenda Patterson Clause." I laughed. "Well, if some good came out of this whole mess, I guess that's it." Over the following months, the neighborhood continued to improve. Brenda sold her house while serving her sentence and moved away. Nobody was sorry to see her go. The new HOA board was reasonable and focused on actual community building rather than petty enforcement. I ran into Greg at the mailbox one day, and he told me that Maria's health had stabilized. The doctors found a new treatment that's really helping. She's doing better than she has in years. That's wonderful news. You know, in a weird way, that whole terrible situation with Brenda led to us going to the ER that day, where a different doctor saw Maria's chart and suggested the new treatment. So something good did come from something bad. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and time-consuming. I also learned the importance of documentation and evidence. Without that security footage from Tom's camera, Brenda might have gotten away with it. One evening about 6 months after everything had happened, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the sunset when my phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. "Mr. Bradley, I wanted to let you know that Brenda Patterson completed her jail sentence last week. She's now on probation. I just thought you'd want to know." "Thanks for letting me know. Do you think there'll be any problems?" Her probation officer told me she's been compliant so far. She's working at her retail job and living in an apartment on the other side of town. Part of her probation terms include staying away from your neighborhood. Good. I also wanted to tell you something off the record. This case made a difference. We've had 3 other similar complaints come in about HOA board members overstepping their authority. People are realizing they don't have to put up with abuse just because someone's on a homeowners association board. So thank you for pursuing this. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about everything that had happened. A simple act of kindness, lending extension cords to a neighbor in need, had spiraled into a criminal case that exposed a tyrant and changed a neighborhood for the better. Sometimes doing the right thing is expensive and time-consuming and frustrating, but it's still worth doing. The next morning, I was heading out for my usual run when I saw a moving truck in front of the house that had been Brenda's. A young couple was unloading furniture. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Cameron. I live a few houses down. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks," the man said, shaking my hand. "I'm Chris, and this is my wife, Amy. We've heard this is a great community. "It is now," I said, and I meant it. As I continued my run through the neighborhood, I passed other neighbors out walking their dogs or working in their yards. People waved and called out greetings. Kids were playing basketball in driveways without worrying about some HOA violation for having the hoop visible from the street. This was what a neighborhood should be, a community of people looking out for each other, not a collection of houses ruled by petty tyrants enforcing meaningless rules. Later that week, Janet Wu sent out an email to the entire neighborhood with an update on the HOA's finances and upcoming projects. At the end, she included a note. "I want to remind everyone that if you ever feel the HOA or any board member is overstepping their authority, you have resources. Don't be afraid to speak up, document issues, and seek legal help if necessary. This board works for you, not the other way around." That summer, the neighborhood held its first annual block party. Over 200 people attended, including Greg and Maria, Tom and his wife, Dorothy Chen, and dozens of other neighbors I'd only known in passing before. There was food, music, games for kids, and a genuine sense of community that I'd never felt in the neighborhood before. As I stood there watching kids run around and neighbors laughing together, Greg came up beside me. "You know what the crazy thing is," he said. "If Brenda hadn't been so obsessed with enforcing that stupid rule, none of this would have happened. You would have loaned me the cords, I would have returned them, and that would have been the end of it." "She couldn't help herself," I said. "Some people get a little bit of power and it goes straight to their heads." "Well, I'm glad you stood up to her. A lot of people wouldn't have." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "There were moments when I thought about just letting it go, buying new cords and moving on. But then I thought about what she might do to the next person who violated one of her precious rules. You probably saved someone from her next power trip." As the block party wound down and the sun started to set, I helped clean up and then headed home. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Wu. "Cameron, the board wanted to thank you officially. We'd like to give you a Community Service Award at next month's meeting for standing up for what was right and helping improve our neighborhood. Would you be willing to accept it?" I texted back, "I appreciate the thought, but I'd rather you give it to Tom Whitmore. His security footage made all the difference. I just refuse to let someone get away with theft." Janet replied, "How about we give awards to both of you? You both contributed to making this neighborhood better." I agreed to that compromise. The award ceremony was held at the community center the following month. It was surprisingly well attended, with at least 80 people showing up. Tom and I each received a plaque and a gift certificate to a local restaurant. More importantly, Janet gave a speech about the importance of accountability and standing up for what's right. This neighborhood was nearly torn apart by someone who thought rules were more important than people, she said. Thanks to Cameron's persistence and Tom's evidence, we not only held that person accountable, but also reformed our entire approach to community governance. This is now a neighborhood where people want to live, not one where they are afraid of stepping on the grass wrong. The crowd applauded, and several people came up afterward to share their own stories about how the changes in the HOA had improved their lives. One elderly couple told me they'd been planning to sell their house and move because they were so tired of the constant fines and harassment. "But now we're staying," the husband said. "This feels like a real community again." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how a single incident during a power outage had changed so much. It had exposed corruption, reformed a neighborhood association, brought a community together, and held someone accountable for their actions. It had also cost me several $100s in legal fees, countless hours of my time, and a significant amount of stress. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Several months later, I received a notification that my case against Brenda Patterson had been closed. All restitution had been paid, and the matter was resolved. The extension cords I'd given to Greg had long since been replaced by new ones I'd bought. Better ones, actually. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued to improve. The HOA became less about enforcement and more about actual community improvement. They organized neighborhood watch programs, social events, and even helped coordinate resources during the next winter storm that hit Texas the following year. No one had to worry about their extension cords being stolen during that storm. In fact, neighbors openly shared resources and helped each other out, which is what should have happened in the first place. One afternoon, about a year after everything had happened, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A woman I didn't recognize got out and walked up my driveway. "Cameron Bradley," she asked. "That's me." "I'm Amanda Peters. I'm a resident in Oakmont Hills, another subdivision about 10 miles from here. I saw your story on the news last year, and I'm dealing with a similar situation with our HOA president. She's been fining people excessively for minor violations and threatening to put liens on homes. I was wondering if you had any advice." I invited her in and spent an hour telling her everything I'd learned. Document everything. Get witness statements. Don't be afraid to involve the police if laws are being broken. Consult with an attorney. Check if any neighbors have security footage. Most importantly, don't let someone abuse their power just because confronting them is uncomfortable. "I was so scared to do anything," Amanda admitted. "Our HOA president is really intimidating." "So was Brenda," I said. "But bullies rely on people being too afraid to stand up to them. Once someone does, their power disappears pretty quickly." Amanda thanked me and left with a page of notes and a renewed determination to address her situation. I later heard that she successfully challenged her HOA president's authority, and that their board underwent similar reforms to what ours had. As I stood in my driveway watching her drive away, I realized that the impact of standing up to Brenda had rippled far beyond just our neighborhood. It had inspired other people to stand up for themselves and demand accountability from those in positions of power. That evening, I got a text from Greg. "Maria and I are moving to Florida to be closer to her sister. Wanted to let you know before the for sale sign goes up. We're going to miss having you as a neighbor." I called him right away. "That's great that you'll be closer to family. Maria doing okay?" "She's doing great, actually. The new treatment has been working really well. We just feel like it's time for a change, and her sister's been asking us to move down there for years. I'm happy for you guys. You'll have to keep in touch." "Of course. And Cameron, thank you again, not just for the extension cords, but for being the kind of neighbor who gives a damn. We need more people like you in the world." After we hung up, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Kids were riding bikes, a couple was walking their dog, and someone was grilling in their backyard. It was exactly what suburban life should be. A few weeks later, there was a nice young family that moved into Greg and Maria's old house. They had 2 kids who immediately made friends with the other children on the street. The neighborhood continued to thrive. As for Brenda, I never saw her again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to a different city and was working a regular job. Her probation would end eventually, and she'd have to live with a criminal record because she couldn't resist the urge to enforce a rule that didn't matter. Sometimes late at night, I think about that morning when Greg knocked on my door asking for help. If I'd said no, or if he'd asked someone else, everything would have been different. But I'd said yes, and that simple act of kindness had set off a chain of events that exposed a petty tyrant and changed a community for the better. The extension cords themselves, the ones that started everything, were still at Greg's house when they moved. He tried to pack them, but I told him to leave them for the new family. Pass them on, I said. Maybe they'll need to help a neighbor someday too. The last I heard, those extension cords were in the new family's garage, waiting for the next time someone needed help. And in Meadowbrook Estates, under the reformed HOA board, people were always helping each other. That's what a community should be. That's what we'd fought for, and that's what we'd won. Looking back on everything that happened, the lesson is clear. Never let someone abuse authority just because standing up to them is inconvenient. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to involve law enforcement when someone crosses the line from petty tyranny into actual criminal behavior. The HOA system isn't inherently bad. When run by reasonable people focused on actual community improvement, it can be beneficial. But when run by people like Brenda who see it as an opportunity to control others, it becomes toxic. Our neighborhood learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it, and we made sure it would never happen again. The reformed bylaws, the new board leadership, and the community spirit that emerged from the crisis all served as safeguards against future abuse. More importantly, people in the neighborhood learned they had a voice and the right to use it. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. It's been 3 years now since the power outage, since the theft, since everything changed. The neighborhood is thriving in ways it never did under Brenda's reign. Property values have actually increased because people want to live here now. The HOA has won awards from the city for community engagement. And most importantly, neighbors actually know and care about each other. Last week, there was a minor power outage, just a couple hours in the afternoon. Within minutes, neighbors were checking on each other, sharing resources, and making sure everyone was okay. That's the culture we built from the ashes of Brenda's tyranny. And somewhere in evidence storage, or maybe in a landfill by now, are 3 orange extension cords that cost $200 and changed everything. They became evidence in a criminal case, symbols of resistance against petty tyranny, and ultimately, tools that helped build a better community. I've been asked to speak at other HOA meetings in the area about what happened and how we reformed our association. Each time, I tell the same story and give the same advice. Rules should serve people, not the other way around. The moment your HOA becomes more about control than community, it's time for change. Some HOAs listen and make changes. Others don't. But at least the conversation is happening, and people are realizing they don't have to accept abuse from association boards. The best part about all of this is that it's created a ripple effect. Our neighborhood's transformation inspired other neighborhoods. Amanda Peters, the woman who came to me for advice, successfully reformed her HOA. She then helped 2 other neighborhoods do the same. Those neighborhoods inspired others. It's proof that standing up to bullies, even when it's hard and expensive and time-consuming, creates positive change that extends far beyond your own situation. My life has mostly returned to normal. I go to work, I come home, I mow my lawn without worrying about whether the grass is exactly 2.5 inches tall. I put up Christmas decorations without measuring whether they are 3 feet from the property line or 3.2 feet. I live without the constant anxiety that characterized life under Brenda's rule, and so does everyone else in Meadowbrook Estates. That's worth everything we went through to get here. And if another petty tyrant ever tries to take over our HOA board, well, we know how to handle that now. We have systems in place, we have experience, and we have a community that won't tolerate abuse of power. That's Brenda Patterson's real legacy, though I doubt she'd see it that way. She wanted to create a perfectly controlled neighborhood where everyone followed her rules without question. Instead, she created a community of people who understand their rights, support each other, and refuse to be bullied. Sometimes the villain's greatest defeat is the strength they accidentally inspire in others. As I write this, sitting on my porch on a beautiful Texas evening, I can hear children playing, neighbors chatting, and the general hum of a healthy, happy community. This is what we fought for. This is what we won. And it all started with 3 extension cords during a power outage and one woman who couldn't resist the urge to steal them because of a rule that didn't matter. She wanted control. She got a criminal record and a legacy as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Meadowbrook Estates became exactly what a neighborhood should be. A place where people help each other, stand up for what's right, and refuse to let petty tyrants ruin the community. That's a pretty good ending to a story that started with me waking up to someone pounding on my door in the middle of an ice storm.